Now let's paint some sky. The first thing that we're gonna need is the colors. We're gonna need 2 colors for the blue sky behind the clouds, the true sky blue. Then the second color is going to be the light blue that I'll fade down to at the horizon. The third color is going to be pure white that I'll put the clouds on, and the fourth color will be the shadow that I put on those clouds. I'm going to post a reference number for you that's straight off of the Sherwin-Williams color chart, so that if you need to, you could just go to that chart, grab that color, they'll mix it for you, or you can just take it wherever you want to and get it mixed and have a visual of exactly what that color looks like. But I'm pre-mixing them because that's the way I like to do it. This is where my Ziploc storage containers come in handy. Just because I can mix the colors right onto the wall like you've seen me do so many times doesn't mean that it's the most helpful way to do it. This is going to allow me to come back to this color and have a large amount of it available and save me a lot of time of mixing on the wall. So I'm going to need blue and white in here, and I'm also going to use this color called magenta. So I didn't get this, I didn't show you this at the store, but it's the same as the other paints, same kind. It's just a quart of ultra deep base with 4 ounces of magenta pigment in it. Just like the gallon has 12 ounces of blue pigment, this has the same proportion of magenta pigment in the ultra deep base. I use that to mix with the blue because the Sherwin-Williams blue is a little bit more on the green side than other blues, but to make it more of a sky blue, I have to add that tiny bit of purple hue to it. I'll pour some white in there. You can see that there's other colors in there, and the reason that that doesn't matter is it's a ratio. If this was on a palette and it was a 50-50 thing and they're getting all mixed together, that would be a problem. But we're talking about such a tiny percentage of blue pigment compared to the 12 ounces of white pigment that's in there that it just doesn't make a difference when it's stirred in. It's just not enough to really affect it. By the time I get way down to the bottom of the can, yeah, it's a little bit affected, but I'm mixing them on the wall anyway. So it's just not as big of a difference as it appears when you see them in there. Now I'm going to put a little bit of this magenta in here. All right, let's mix that up and see what kind of color we got. I love this bright blue. Yeah, here we go. So I'm definitely thinking that we're going to use more white. Pour some more white in there. Now listen, you don't need to wipe your hands on your clothes. I mean, there's a wall right here that's got all kinds of paint on it, and it's going to get more. Just wipe your hand on the wall if you need something to wipe it on, and keep a big rag handy. Wipe it on the rag. You know, use your hand and smear it out. Just don't be afraid of the paint, but there's no need to wipe it all over your pants. It's going to dry in a few seconds and crumble off your hands. You don't need to worry about it. The second color I'm mixing is the light blue. So I've got just pure white in there, and I just need to add some blue to it. I don't even think I'm going to bother with that magenta color. I'm just going to add a little bit of blue. You see what a tiny amount of blue affected this white? It's a small amount. All I did was dip my finger in it and put it in there. To compare these colors, I'm going to go like this. I'm just going to put them next to each other. So you see, I'm fading from this darker one to this lighter one. And I like the way that looks right there. I think I'll go a little bit more blue in this guy right here. So one more finger dip will probably do it. Maybe another. We want these colors to be nice and light. These are some of the lightest colors in the whole painting. If we make the sky too dark, then we've limited the rest of the picture right from the start. You can only get so bright in a painting without it looking wrong if you've got a dark sky. This color is going to be the blue and the white again. And this time I'll add a little bit of red to it. And I don't need a lot of this color. I really only need a little because it's just going to be for some shadows on the white clouds. So let's put some blue. Let's get a little bit of red. Okay, I got to make sure that this shadow color is darker Then my brightest color, I want it to be darker than, a little bit darker than that, which it is. I want it to be a little bit lighter than my sky color, which it is. Thinking right now. Let's go a tiny bit darker. Tiny bit of red and a tiny bit of blue, we'll do it. Like that. This is kind of a fun part. Just mixing with your finger. Yeah, that's a good color. Let's just use that one. So these are my 4 colors. I've got my sky color. I've got my lighter sky color, which is going to go down by the horizon. I've got my cloud color, which is pure white, and the shadow for those clouds, which is this light grayish purple. Getting a gradient on the sky is probably the most difficult thing, and I get a lot of questions about that. Let me show you exactly how I get a nice even fade from the deeper blue at the top to a lighter color by the horizon, which is the natural effect of the sky. If you look outside, then you'll see that it gets lighter as it approaches the horizon, and if you're able to accomplish that in a painting, it gives it a much more three-dimensional effect. So that is exactly what I'm going to do. So I've got my 2 colors. This is the darker blue, and I'm going to do just like I did with the buckets of paint, and I'm going to start at the top with my deeper blue color. So I'll do exactly like I showed you earlier with this kind of diagonal roll pattern, and I'll get enough paint on here now. I'll put it about 2.5 feet wide, 2 to 3 feet wide. I'm not going to work in sections wider than that. I want to work in a section small enough that I can blend the whole thing before it dries. Now I have the roller and I have a brush to blend it. So I'll put both colors on and then I'll start blending it with my brush. I'm going to use the same roller. Not worried about it mixing. Just getting paint on the wall. Get a little more of that. Okay, now that I've got a good amount of paint on the wall, it's time to hang the roller on the edge of the bucket, or anywhere else you want to, and start using the brush. I'm going to get the brush a little bit wet. I just like to always work with a wetter brush so that the paint dries slower. I'm going to start blending. Well, so far this seems pretty simple. I've got a bucket that's a mix of water and extender down here, and I'm dipping in that so that I can mix it on the surface. And I'm just mixing in the water as I kind of use a figure 8 motion to blend my lighter color and my darker color. And I'm definitely starting to experience the drying of the paint, so I've got to move quick. I'm gonna lay this stuff off here. Laying off means that you're just going across with the brush to smooth out the surface. Okay. Like that. I'm not going to worry about real small details. If there's little streaking, things like that, I'm not going to worry about that, because I can always cover it up with clouds later, or just leave it. Put this. I'm going to step down and see, I want the horizon a little lower than eye level, because I want kids to be able to enjoy the look of this, and a horizon should be at eye level. I'm going to let this section dry all the way before I overlap it with another section. That is the problem that people run into trying to do a gradient with fast drying paint, is that you try to overlap in area you just did, and the paint you already put on is too tacky. And when it's at that transitional stage, it's not wet, it's not all the way dry, it does not handle well at all. You go over it with the brush and it pulls and leaves marks and creates texture and it ruins it. You got to let it dry all the way. I'm going to do the exact same thing on this end, and then when both sections are dry, I'll do the middle. Now I already know that you're going to be wondering, well, what do you do about the 2 colors that are in your roller now, because you use both colors? Well, water-based paint does not bleed into itself nearly as badly as oil-based paint. But I do want to get as much of the paint out of this as I can, so I'll just go down here on a part of my wall that I know I'm going to cover, and I'll just try to roll out a lot of that paint. Because as long as I get a lot of it out of the roller, then it's just whatever is on the outside surface of the roller that'll transfer onto the wall. Now, if you have a hard time with that, if it's an issue, just wash out the roller. No big deal. It's better to wash out the roller and be happy with the look of your picture than to get all frustrated. You know, it's not that much extra time. Okay, we've done the left side, the right side. Now, I'm going to try to do this as identically to what I've already done as I can. I'm going to try to do the exact same thing. Start with the darker color. Now, since this is dry to the touch, it's not going to dissolve when I overlap it. So I want to overlap it. I'm trying to make sure this is all covered. Now, even though it's dry to the touch, it's still going to speed dry the coat that's over the top of it. It's going to dry fast. This section where it's overlapped will dry faster than sections where it's not overlapped because of that activated hardener in the paint. But there's still enough time. I'm just going to try to move quick and do the same thing we already did. Now the lighter color. That's it. I blended that. There's going to be some overlap. Let's see what it looks like when it dries all together. Now you might have a little bit of trouble where it's not matching 100% on the overlap. And so I'm going to show you how to troubleshoot that. But listen, a little bit really doesn't matter. I can just put clouds over this. That's why I'm not even going to mess with this spot, because I'll just put a cloud over that. But down here, I'll show you how we can just use the colors we already have mixed and blend that out. It's just very minor. When the whole picture's painted, you're not going to see it nearly as much. But this smaller brush, I can feather this paint out a lot better than I could with the big brush. And I'll just do the same thing I did with the roller. I'm adding little bits of the darker color, mostly the lighter color, and I'm just trying to gauge it according to where it is. This is 50% mix, this is 100% light, up there's 100% dark. So I'm just trying to estimate where it is in between and just feathering, but not spending a lot of time feathering it, just a little bit. If you spend too much time feathering something, it leaves some kind of unattractive texture on it. You'll see on the thinnest parts where you feather it, it'll be drying very quickly, and you'll be able to see whether or not it's matching. So wherever it doesn't match, if I can just put a cloud over it, I'll just put a cloud over it. Okay, to finish off the edge of this, instead of hard line, I'm choosing to make a fade into the existing wall color. The original wall paint is in this 5-gallon bucket down here that I'm going to dip into. I'm going to put my sky color that I still have left over. This is the lightest color right here. I'm going to estimate my mix gauged on what I already mixed myself. So I'm going to some of the dark color up here, some of the light color. I'm going to just do my best estimation to match it, and I'm not going to sweat it matching perfectly. Apply the blue. Apply the original wall color. This is one thing where I want to use separate brushes. This is a second brush that doesn't have any of the blue in it, and I don't want them to mix because you definitely will see that on the wall. So I'm putting them close together, being careful not to mix on the same brush. Brush number 3 I'm going to use to blend them together, and I'll use my water if I need to make those blend smoothly. Just running these together. And maybe you don't need to do 100% soft gradient on this. Maybe if you leave some brush strokes showing, it'll just give it some interesting texture. You know, sometimes I'll do that. I'll just leave some of the strokes because it just gives it some brush texture that actually doesn't look bad. I can come back at any point and rework any of the colors that I've got in there. My blend brush, so you see I'll be going back and forth, just using the appropriate brush. Okay, let's go a little bit higher on the picture. This is a mix right here. This is where it's about 50-50. So I've done the lighter, do some of the darker. It doesn't look like it matches, but water-based paint dries dramatically darker. Wall color, blend brush. I always try to work fast because it is true that this paint dries fast. So you can see I'm really racing to do it. Okay, I'll continue to do that all the way around this. Just blending these colors, matching the blue, and then blending that wall color into it so I get a nice soft gradient all the way around. So now that I have this where I like it, it's time to do the clouds. The first color I'll need for my clouds will be the pure white. So I've poured it in this little storage container. And this is pure white right now, straight out of the gallon. But something that I like to do is add a tiny bit of orange to it, because it looks a little more like natural sunlight if you do that. You definitely can just use straight pure white, which I've also done many times. But I like the effect of a tiny bit of color in the light, and the orange contrasts nicely with the blue and the shadows that I'll be using. I'll just dab my finger in the red, I'm gonna stir it in, and then I'm gonna dab my finger in the yellow. Do the same thing. Red and yellow makes orange. So I'm adding orange to my white. You won't find this color on a chart somewhere because it's such a tiny amount of orange that's in it. But that tiny bit makes such a good visual improvement, in my opinion, that I always like to just add that little bit in there. Okay, let's not make this too complicated. The basic shape of a cloud, there's a lot of different kinds of clouds. The kind I'm gonna do is just a simple cumulus cloud, which just has an arched top and a very slightly arched underside, because it's basically round from underneath and you're looking in perspective, so it turns it to a long skinny oval on the very underside. So it's rounded on the bottom. I'm just making a boundary area to illustrate to you right now. Now a cloud tends to be made of a lot of smaller, similarly shaped objects. So a cloud might be made of 100 of these little guys. So, you know, let's say it's here. I don't normally paint a cloud like this, I just go at it, but I want you to understand, because it can be tricky trying to come up with the right shape for a cloud. So this is how you can more systematically develop the shape of a cloud and make it look more natural. Let's come out here, as if it's a whole bunch of small clouds all clustered together like this. I'll go up here. So you get the idea. Now that I've done that, I'm going to show you how to build the edge of the cloud. The size of these little puffs that I'm going to make, they matter. So you don't want to make them real giant and you don't want to make them real tiny. The perspective that you have outside, I'm using this one brush that I like to, that's the 2-inch glide that Purdy makes, because I like the size of the point of this brush for doing these little puffs on the cloud. I've done them bigger, I've done them smaller, and just to get kind of the similar feel you get if you walked outside right now, there's a certain size that matches that more closely, and I feel like this one does a good job at that. But you can experiment with different things. Some are bigger, some are smaller. The brush size is how you do it. You can see that it's just this motion over and over. I want a good amount of paint on there. I'm doing this in slow motion so you can see what I'm doing. This is the basic motion I'm using. And then I'll also do this thing where I keep the brush more stationary while I massage the bristles by moving the handle around. The bristles aren't moving as much as the handle is, but the reason I do that is because it kind of slowly pushes an edge out that's a little bit sharper, and I can kind of control where it goes in a slower motion. So as I'm doing this, I'll break the pattern. You know, I made these little guides. I don't want to stick real tight with those. You want to make sure you break that line. In some areas you break it a lot, in some areas you break it a little. You might do a long skinny one that comes out. See how I just turned the brush sideways? Hey, that's how Bob Ross used to do them pine trees. Dunk, 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 like that. I could turn it up this way to get a more level line on the underside of that. See, so this is the same kind of shape, just stretched out long. And then I flipped the brush backwards. See how I did that? And then I just used the point, and I'm dragging the point down at this angle to make these smaller shapes along the top. You'll discover your own brush techniques that you like as you get more and more familiar with one of these big brushes. Do some puffs in there. You can even turn the brush backwards to get larger puffy patterns. There'll be larger little round shapes if you turn the brush backwards and use it that way. When I say backwards, I mean this edge of it. All right, let's do a few more of these in other places in the sky, and then we'll come back after this is dry and do the next layer where I'll do the shadows on them and make them look three-dimensional. So I really like doing these cumulus clouds, these puffy ones, but everybody likes to do those. But there are a lot of different kinds of clouds, so let's talk about a different kind. When clouds are real close to you, you don't see this real hard outline. A lot of times they're more wispy. The general rule with them, though, is whatever causes the smaller shape also causes the bigger shape, because clouds kind of go with wind currents. So to make a cloud look natural, you can kind of think, oh, I'm going to go with kind of this diagonal spear shape like this, just kind of a brush stroke. And the same way I built these clouds out of building the same similar shapes all over each other, these can kind of be the same. So watch my brush patterns. I'll just try to kind of stay generally consistent, very loosely, and just staying with this angled shape and just building this cloud out. And I'll do little, I'm working with the brush pretty dry now. I'll do little things coming off of it, and then I'll take my hands and I'll smear out the edges just a little bit, and I'll mess with it. You know, this is the fun thing about these water-based paints as opposed to oil, is that you can have a dry base in no time, and then you can smear wet paint all over the surface of it. And then maybe a thing I notice about these kind of clouds is they always have little skinny connections. You know, like wherever there's kind of a blob of cloud, there'll be some little string of cloud connecting them. So I always try to leave these little pockets of negative space in here with these little tiny strings connecting them. And so this is one kind. I'll work with this cloud, and maybe we'll bring it way down here, and it's a close one, so all the details are going to be obscured and foggy. I can just dip this brush in water. Watch this. Just dip it in water. Now I have this real thin layer of white, and I'll smear it out with my hand. As it dries and tacks up, it'll start doing different things. It'll pull more and might start leaving interesting shapes in there. It's fun to paint with your hands. I get cool marbling looks this way too. This is a cheap little brush. You can get nice ones at an art store that are this same kind. You can see it has this angled tip. These are synthetic bristles. I think a lot of times they're called sable hair brushes, and they have real fine bristles compared to the one that I was just now using. These bristles are way fatter. They're both nice brushes, but this will put a much smoother texture on the wall. So it's nice for tiny details. So I just barely dip the tip of it in, and with these, I can get lighter and lighter. This is just feathering, wet on dry, just feathering and by leaving the bottom edge of each of these shapes with more paint on it than the top edge, I can make the look of these clouds kind of on a horizontal plane. Sometimes I'll do a few just to get paint out of my brush, then I'll come back and feather out the top edges of them like this, and some on the bottom edge too. And a lot of times these little guys are connected together too, so you might make a couple little connections like this. The paint will start drying real fast when you're putting it on this thin, and you can actually take advantage of that and start feathering as it dries, and it won't feather as much. So if you need to only do a tiny bit, you just let it dry a little bit. I can go back over the areas I already did to make them cover a little better. When you're working this small with this thin, it dries super fast. Just doing random little shapes, you know. I'm just doing it so that the negative space kind of draws squiggly lines through it. And I'll get smaller and smaller as I get downward till it just kind of disappears. Smaller shapes so that it's just kind of a real light layer of these clouds that are way up high. What'll really give it perspective is by making these bigger as they go up, which is the case with all of my clouds. As they get higher on the picture, they should appear closer to you, because the perspective of the sky is the further away they are, the smaller, the lower to the horizon they get. So the lower ones are the further ones. Except in the case of one like this that I'm just extend all the way through just for fun. Now it's time to do the shadows on the clouds. So I have my cloud shadow color that I mixed beforehand in this storage container here. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the same brush that still has the white in it, and this is a second coat of white now. And you can see that on the second coat it's very opaque and you can no longer see the blue sky through it. And I'm going to use both the shadow color and this white color. I'm just going to close that gap. It's getting hard. I'm going to use both the shadow color and the white color simultaneously while they're wet. So before we get real complex with this, let me just show you that you can just put this any old where like this, you know, put it on there. And because I've mixed these colors to look like the colors of a cloud, just kind of randomly mixing them together with the tip of the brush, but not mixing them so much that all of the shapes are gone, leave a few shapes, that all by itself will look like clouds. And that's kind of a fun way to do a simpler style, so you don't have to get real in depth with the details. I want you to feel comfortable with this paint, and I don't want you stressing the details. The details are there for fun. Do them because we can. So let me come up here and do the same thing, put the white on. Now this time we'll get a little more detailed with this guy. Get enough white. Now I want to explain something about this shadow color. That is, if this shadow color here is lighter than the blue sky, which it is a little bit lighter, then it's going to make the clouds look more fluffy and light, not like rain clouds. If this shadow color is a little bit darker than the blue sky, all of a sudden the clouds will look rainy, more like storm clouds. So that's a little tip for you if you're mixing them on your own, if you're mixing these colors. Up here I have wet white paint. So let's start putting in some little details with the shadow color. I'm getting a lot of the white out of my brush when I do this, just getting it so there's not a lot of white in there. I'll just barely dip the tip in my shadow color. You can see it on there, that I just have some of that shadow color. And then I'll start just beating it on the edge of this, around the edge of the cloud, getting as close to that edge as I can. even all the way to the edge, maybe even overlapping it a little bit. And it'll create those, do you see these little shadows? Those are like the little puffs on the cloud. You see, I can turn it backwards and do some, by doing these arching swoops like that. I could do it that way. My favorite way to do it though is that first way I showed you. I'll kind of get rid of a lot of it down here. So now it has mostly, it has a lot of white in it. It's no longer that full concentration. So up here on the tip of the cloud, I can do fine little lines. You'll notice that you'll see this a lot better after it dries. But however you do it, just kind of doing this dabbing motion with it just on the tip of the brush will create all these puffy little shadows. And then if you kind of dry out the brush, and as this is drying out, it's getting more and more tacky. If you very quickly and lightly drag this big brush across the surface, it'll blend them. It'll make it real soft. But you have to practice this technique. You know, it's something that you have to do very quickly and lightly. It easily smears it all together and ruins everything you did. So then after I get that little bit of texture in there, then I can come across and put the shadow color on the underside of wherever I want the bottoms of these clouds to be. I kind of constructed this as a bunch of small clouds clustered together, so I'll put these shadows together accordingly. I'm just going along the bottom side of each area, and I'll round it up, I'll swoop it up wherever I see the shape of the cloud, you know, I'll swoop it up on the edges of that. Just this color all by itself, put in random places, will create the look of depth. So you'll create shape on your cloud, even by accident, just by putting this color there. And you can come back with the white color too, if you want to add more white in there. As long as it's soft, kind of blend it together. You can do that same technique I showed you, where you just quickly drag it and do that. I can do some areas where I put a lot of this shadow. Since I know that this color is a little bit lighter than the color of the sky, it's still going to have enough contrast to pop out right there on that edge. So I could just fill this whole area with shadow. And this will give the clouds a lot of depth if you have some areas that are all shadow color. Get the white. I'm not going to worry about doing all these detailed little puffs for most of these, because it looks good just by kind of using the tip of the brush and doing these kind of bending swoops through it, and then just not mixing it all the way. When you're standing back looking at the whole picture, I found that that looks nice. If you want to get more detailed, then you know it's fun. It's fun to do all those little things. It's not the detail that makes a painting look good, I've found. It's more the way you construct the entire picture. You know, just the details alone are not going to make it look good or bad. The colors will have a more dramatic impact. And those little details of shape. Get more of the shadow color, put it up here. We'll make our light source probably kind of coming slightly this way, because there's a light on the ceiling above me that kind of corresponds with that, and I think it'll look good if I make the natural light in the room go along with the way this painting will be lit. So I'll have most of the shadow over on the left sides of these clouds. It's kind of fun to put a big bright highlight right in there. If you have light coming from above or light coming from behind, lighten up these clouds. Any cloud in front of it's going to be darker because there's more layers. So I see these kind of clouds all the time. I think these are fun. I like the way they look. Well, you'll have just a little guy. Watch how I'll just make one, and it'll have a pretty hard edge on it. I'm just using the shadow color all by itself, using just the point of the brush, and doing just like I originally did with the white. And I'm just going to make the shape of a little cloud. And this dark color and that hard edge just pops it right out into the foreground, like it's just a little cloud that's hovering out here in front of this big white one. Maybe add another little one in here. See, and then I can take just the tiniest bit of white and add some fun little details into the middle of it. Clouds always kind of have this dark outline to them, where the shadow bends around even the top side. It's just the way the water droplets bend the light causes a shadow even on the top side of the cloud. So lighting the cloud just from the middle portions, gives it that natural looking roundness. And so I have some interesting little foreground clouds there, just little. I'll do a few more of those in there as I progress and decide where I want things to be. And another thing that immediately gives your picture depth is to put a light top of a cloud coming right out from under one of the dark undersides of a cloud. You kind of make it a soft edge, but you see how I made that horizontal line? Then I'm bringing this down so that it really shows that behind this. This is fun, watch this. Let me just soften those edges. See how it goes light, dark, light? Then I'll end it with a dark edge. And then that creates perspective of clouds behind clouds, of it going back along the, pointing at the horizon. I had a drip there, so we'll just turn it into a cloud. So the next question is, what if they're far away? That's going to be an important question to ask throughout the process of painting this mural. So if I've got clouds way back on the horizon, we're going to find that the shadow color is very close to the color of the sky because there's a lot of atmosphere in between your view and the cloud. So let me grab the sky color and start using that as the shadows for these little distant ones. First, we'll put a layer of white on these distant clouds here. So we'll make these our background clouds. We want these to kind of disappear into the sky more than the clouds that are up above it. And you can see my brush, I've been using this for both colors, so my white is getting kind of dirty. So it's nice to have a clean brush handy. I always have a lot of brushes around just in case that happens. So here I'm putting this bright white on there. And then for the shadow on this, instead of using my shadow color, I'll just use the blue sky color. So now I'm just going to dip into this, which is the top sky color, but right now I'm going to use it as the shadow color for these clouds. So we'll put this down here, just like we did with the other clouds. We're going to shade them at the base. We're going to go around the edge. I'm not going to, I guess I can kind of do this dabbing technique. However, these are distant clouds, so the details aren't going to matter a lot. Just kind of swirl the two colors together. Put some of this blue in here. So this blue is going to make these clouds just almost disappear into this blue sky, which is going to make them look real far away. Let's put another shadow here because I'm shading everything kind of on the left side, like I said. So the closer any object in your painting is to the sky color, the further back into the sky it will look. I've always kind of been unsatisfied with the way the edges of my clouds look, hard to get them to look finished. And as I was doing them just now, I was putting the white on, and I want to show you that I just barely dipped the brush in this paint right here, just like I did. But instead of doing the typical dabbing, I just kind of go along the edge like this. You see how I'm doing these bow-shaped strokes, and then coming back with the white, doing it right on top. And the mixing of these kind of naturally creates this rounded edge at the same time as making these little puff patterns. And what I'll do is I'll just let it dry it, tack up just like that. And then I'll come down here on the wall and dry out my brush, and then I'll use this as just a dry brush to feather, because see, once I do that, see how it's not getting on my hand when I touch it? It's because the very tips of that are actually dry because it's that fast drying water-based paint. So I can use that to feather without getting it on the blue. And I just do a real quick drag, just like I did before. I just do that, get it off the brush, do it again. See how it gets real soft? Dude, I love that. It's like makes that little edge so soft, so realistically. Love that. Now when you get to this cloud here, this is different than the rest, so I'll use a little bit different shadowing method. But like with all of them, I look for the larger areas, and then I try to shadow the areas in between those. So I say, well, this looks like a big chunk of cloud here with one here. Maybe I'll shadow in between. And that's kind of what I did with all of them. But you don't have to follow that method. And to be honest, you might be better off if you don't think about it. It might come out more natural looking. So because of the kind of cloud this is, where it's just kind of going all over the place, I'm just gonna randomly put white and put the shadow color and just see what comes out. Maybe smear it with my hand. That can get real fun when you start using your hands. You can even bring that shadow color out onto the blue like I did with the white, where I kind of did this. I did like these little lines, and then I did this zigzagging smear with them. And maybe you'll come up with something new on your own. And maybe it'll help you do better if you don't look at it while you're painting it. Just kind of, like that. Come back with your hand. You never know what fun thing might happen. Okay, we're done with the clouds. I'm really happy with how they turned out. And now I'm thinking we need some mountains. So let's do that.